Hello, I'm Greg, and this is my review of Sheriff of Nottingham. This game was originally designed by Sergio Halban and Andre Zatz. Um, I'm sure I butchered your names, and therefore I apologize. But it was published by Arcane Wonders and Galapagos Hojos. And it's a Dice Tower essential game. I believe it's the first one in that series. So we'll get right to it. This is a typical setup for Sheriff of Nottingham with a four-player game. If you're playing with less than four players, you want to remove all the cards, then their lower left have this 4+ icon. I do apologize, it's a bit hard to see in the camera, but it's right there in the lower corner here, right there. You just remove all of those. There's a lot in the deck. There's like 36 bread cards and various others. This is to kind of help balance out the game with less players so that the sheriff doesn't have as much of a hard time. I also included some of the variants, which is like the royal goods cards, which are worth more points at the end, but they're also a risk. They also give you some special things like counts as like 2 breads instead of 1 bread, but also is more valuable. So there are some advantages to using those cards, and it also makes it harder for the sheriff to deduce whether or not you're lying. And I'll get to that in the gameplay section. So once you have pretty much removed everything from the box, you would set up a draw deck in the center, thoroughly shuffled. Then you discard 5 cards on the sides, and additionally you would deal out 6 cards or 7, depending on which you're playing with the variant, to each player. So I'm going to go ahead and do that right now. So I've dealt 6 cards to each player. I'm not playing with the variant, so no big deal. Also, each player gets one of these character cards, as you can see from the card itself. And I do apologize for the glare. There's not any specific crazy information here that's different. And you can see in the corners here, they have sections for each of the goods type with 2 monetary values. The one on top is if you're the king, aka have the most of that good. The second one is if you have the second most. So at the end of the game, if you have, like, for example, the most apples, you get 20 bonus points. If you're the second most apples, you get 10 bonus points. The third most, you get nothing. So, in other words, apples are the most valuable commodity in the game. But you might instead focus on maybe having the most chickens and the most bread, so that way whoever gets the most apples gets 20 points, while you might get 25 because you have a combination of the two. So the strategies vary based on which goods you are targeting, which is your starting hand, of course. Then you give 50 gold to each player. They could be in any kind of combinations. The game comes with 1s, 5s, 20s, and 50s. It's recommended that you do 2 20s, a 5, and 5 1s. You can obviously cash in anytime you want, and it comes with a nice little tray if you want to put the money in. There's also the sheriff, which is to denounce the first starting player. So, for example, if green were to be the starting player, they would get the sheriff icon first. The way you determine starting player is whoever has the most gold in their pocket or money then gets to go first as the sheriff. On your turn, the game is broken down into market, loading the merchant bag, declaration, inspection, and end of round. The way market works is you take your hand of cards, you look through them, and you go, okay, I have 6 cards, and you can keep up to 5 of these cards at the beginning of the market phase. Then you must discard and draw back up to 6. So, for example, for a blue player here, I'm going to keep these 3 cards face down. 1, 2, 3. I'm going to discard them in this discard pile, and now I can either draw from the discard piles from the top down, or I can draw from the face down deck. I have to draw as many cards as I want to from the face up discards before I can draw from the draw deck. But you can't, like, just go through them and be like, okay, I want this chicken, therefore I'm going to grab it and put it in my deck. No, you'd have to take the bread and then the chicken. So there is a slight disadvantage to that. So if you look at this hand, I have a bread and 2 apples. So at this point, I'd want to get more bread and more apples before we go into the load bag phase. But judging from the top of these decks, there's not really a whole lot of bread. There's some cheese and some bread cards I just put down, some chicken, and this royal bread. Now, granted, I might take this as a bluff, be like, hey, I'm going to take this card and put it here so the sheriff thinks I'm going to cheat, but doesn't really know because they don't know what I have in my hand. And then I'm going to take, let's say, 2 more cards from the top from the face down deck, which then I get a keg and a barrel, and an apple. And I put that on my play. Now, it does go in left order from the sheriff, so I'm going to rearrange these slightly so that it makes more sense why I just did that. So, yeah. So now the play continues to the left. We check this guy's cards. He's got some crossbows, an apple, some bread, some pepper, and some more, and 2 more bread. So clearly he has an advantage here. He has a lot of bread and an apple. He'll discard the bow and arrow to try to be like, hey, Sheriff, look, I'm being honest. I'm discarding my red card, and then I'm drawing another card. Here you got another apple. Then the red player goes. The red player has 3 apples, some pumpernickel bread, which is a royal goods card. It counts as 3 bread at the end of the game, and it's worth 9 points. The typical bread is only worth like 2 points or 3 points per card. What is it? Typical bread is worth 3 points. So as you can see, the royal bread card is worth a lot of points. Plus it counts as 3, so you get closer to becoming king. So that's something that you want to keep secret from the other players as well. So that's red card's hand. Now the sheriff doesn't actually draw any cards or discard any cards during this market phase because they're not going to participate in the goods. They're playing the sheriff. At this point, we go into the load market bag phase. During the load market bag phase, each player can then load their bag of goods from 1 to 5 goods. They can't load 0 and they can't load 6. So they would pick up their bag, secretly choose 1 to 5 cards from their hand. So this player is going to choose 3 apples. And why not, for good measure, we're going to throw in a royal goods bread card. So that's a total of 4 cards. It's important that you remember exactly how many cards you put in the bag because you have to declare exactly how many cards you have. And then you snap it closed and you put it down ready to go. Each player then does the same thing. So this player is going to put in 3 bread cards. They're going to be honest. They're not going to cheat. So they're going to put that in their bag. And then the red player is then going to go through their card. They see they have a royal bread card that's worth 3 at the end of the game. They got a bunch of apples and a bunch of red cards. So they're going to take the 3 apples and 1 mead card, which is worth 7 points at the end of the game. But it's just a illegal good. So they're going to smuggle that in with their bread, with their apples, in hopes that the sheriff won't notice. Now the next phase of the game is declaration. During declaration, you have to declare only 1 good type, and you have to declare exactly how many cards you have in your bag. Obviously, you don't want to declare the illegal goods. You would just basically say, hey, Sheriff, I have in my bag here, I have like 4 apples. Sorry, 4 apples. So I have 4 cards in my bag. Then I give it to the sheriff. The sheriff will eye me, be like, oh, are you telling the truth? Are you lying? You can then bribe the sheriff. You know, like, I'll give you 3 gold to not look in my bag and to trust me that this is how many I have. Then the yellow player will be like, okay, well, I only put in, I don't know, 3 bread. I'm going to give it to the sheriff. But yeah, I put in 3 bread. I'm not lying, so therefore I'm not going to pay you any money. Then the red player might go and be like, okay, well, I have 4 apples. I'm also not lying, so I'm not giving you money, but I will give you 5 gold to take a look at the blue player's bag. So the sheriff at this point will think, what should I do? We'll try to negotiate. I think you're lying. I think you're telling the truth. Who's going to give me more money? Etc., etc. Then at some point, reasonable amount of time has passed, they then declare what they're going to do. Yellow, I trust you, so you get to keep your bag. Blue, you seem pretty honest fella, and I appreciate the 3 gold. I'm going to take a look at your bag. And then they take the gold and place it there. Red, you seem very eager to draw attention away from yourself, so I'm going to give you back your 5 gold, and I'm going to take a look in your bag. At this point, the sheriff will open up the bag and take a look. In here we find out he has only 3 apples and a mead card. So therefore he is in violation of the inspection. Now as you can see, there's a red cost there, so that's 4. So the red player will now have to pay 4 in order to basically compensate for trying to take in the illegal goods. Then you give them back the 3 apples, which then they'll put at the side of their character sheet where it says apples in clear view of all players, and the red card gets discarded to a discard pile. So now that the player has been caught, they have to pay the sheriff however much money that was confiscated. In this case was 4. Then what happens is the sheriff puts it in a discard pile of their choice, like he did here, and the goods that were legal, that were declared, go back to the player, and then the player puts them in full view. If, however, like the blue guy, if the sheriff did not inspect their bag, they get the bread, they put it face down without showing anybody in the contraband section, and then they take the 3 apples and they put those face up in clear view of all the players. So the players should have common knowledge of what goods did pass inspection unless they're illegal. But then of course they know it's illegal because it's face down. So now it's like, oh my god, you were lying. You're very suspicious. So another player might then consider that a concern. While yellow player here, who told the truth, gets away scot-free and is an honest person, so therefore they might be a little less suspicious towards that player in the future. Finally, if the sheriff had said to the yellow player, I don't believe you, I'm going to check your bag, they would have to pay the red price for each legal good that was declared. So for example, if I declared there was 3 bread and the sheriff was like, no, I think you're lying, and they would take a look, he would owe me 6 credits because each bread is worth 2 fines. So now the play marker then passes to the player on the left. Okay, so now the blue player is now the new sheriff. And the game then will begin a new round by all players who did go to market phase, in the case blue, yellow, and red, get cards back up to 6 cards. So blue will have 4 cards from the draw deck, yellow gets 3, and red in turn gets 4 as well. So there's that. Now we're ready for the next round. The next round continues and rinse and repeats until each player has been the sheriff twice. Once each player has been the sheriff twice, the game ends. At this point, you tally up your score. You would count up all the apples, breads, cheese, and chickens that you have on your particular marketplace. You count those up. You then take however much contraband you have and flip them over at this point. So in this case, he has 3 bread, so that would increase, or 2 bread, sorry, so that increases the total bread plus 6 points because it is the gold value at the top. So blue player would, in this particular hand case, if it ended this round, would have 12 points because he has 3 apples and a 6 for the illegal bread. He has the has a tie for the most apples, and this guy has the most bread. So I mean, this is not very realistic because I only went through 1 round, but basically you'd calculate all your points up. Whoever has the most points wins the game. So gold is worth their value, so this would be worth 20 points if it's 20 piece, 5 points and 1 piece, etc. So you add up all the points that you have total on your mats, including your goods, your gold, and not the cards that were in your hand. Those just get discarded right away. So it's just whatever made it through inspection and whatever gold you may have acquired through bribes and whatnot. And then what happens is then the winner is declared. So that's the game in a nutshell. It's a pretty simple bluffing game. So we'll get to the conclusion now. Okay, so that is how Sheriff of Nottingham basically works. So let's get to my conclusion. The manual is pretty good. It's pretty straightforward. It's not a very complicated game, so there's not a whole lot of complicated rules. The gameplay is pretty simple as well. The game is fun. There's no doubt about that. We had a good time. It's fun to bluff. It's fun to try to figure out, are you bluffing? Are you not bluffing? Take risks. Make deals. Nice thing about the bribing is it doesn't have to necessarily be gold. It can also be goods, favors, like, hey, if you don't inspect my bag, I won't inspect yours. There's an honor system, but you don't really have to live up to that if you promise for future services necessarily. But if you do, like, say, I'm going to give you 10 gold, if you don't look at my bag, you have to give them the 10 gold immediately and the goods and whatnot. So um, I was a little disappointed in the fact that these character sheets, which are really well drawn and really cool, don't have like a variant where they have like special powers or whatnot, as it would make the game a little bit more diverse and replayability would be a lot higher. Because honestly, I think that after you play this game a few times, other than the group that you're part of, there's not really a whole lot of reasons to keep playing. It's pretty much just the same thing. It's a nice filler game, but it's not like a game that I'd want to bust out all the time and play. Another nice thing that the game does come with is on the back of the manual, it has a quantities list breakdown per goods type, so you can tell, which helps a little bit with the bluffing. Because like if a player says, I have, for example, 3 chickens, and you're playing in a 4 to 5 player game, you have 24 chickens in the game, and there's already been like 5, red player said they have 5, you have 5. There's like 2 in the discard pile, and green player already had declared 4 the previous turn. The likelihood they're going to have a lot of chickens is less. So that helps a little bit. I wouldn't rely 100% on that because, like, for example, apples, there's 48 in the game. So unless you're really keeping track, it's going to be hard to maintain, but it's nice nonetheless because you get an idea and a feel for whether or not there's a chance the player's lying. It also tells you the goal value of everything and the penalties. I really wish they had made this a reference card so that each player can have it on their mat rather than having to constantly be like sharing the manual. Like, yeah, let me see the manual. I want to see how many cards there are. And there's definitely room on this card. They could have made it a little bit bigger and had like maybe here at the bottom that list. So there's some improvements to components and some expandability to this game that definitely I look forward to seeing in the future, potentially. Like, for example, special things for each character. Like maybe the red player, they might have a thing where they get past inspection if they have mead because they're known, because they're known bread dealers, so they're planning to have yeast around or something like that. Or maybe the blue player has different values, like they might be cheese worthy, so that their cheeses are worth more than the apples. So small things like that would have definitely enhanced the game. Thematically, I don't really understand the sheriff rotating, because why would the sheriff every turn be a different person? That, and then the icon, obviously, it's the character is this guy. And each player is representing him. So I understand mechanically why that works, but thematically, it just seemed weird that the sheriff kept changing players, and yet it was the same person. Yeah, that was a little strange thematically, but mechanically, like I said, it works fine. And in fact, I mean, it works great. But like, would have liked to have a little bit more of a story behind that, like how the sheriff keeps changing, or if it's more like, anonymous, like you don't actually see the sheriff, and you're just kind of like, here's my goods, and then like that's why it's a different player each time, or something along those lines. But like I said, it's a simple game. It's not really designed to be thoroughly thematic or crazy in the sense of like, oh my god, this is Arkham Horror or anything like that. It's designed to be a nice little filler game. It fills a niche of these type of games, which I'll get to in more in my next section. But basically, I gave Sheriff of Nottingham a solid 7 out of 10. Like I said, it's not a game that I would want to constantly play every day or like really bring to the table with everybody. But if we were playing games and like a buddy calls, it's like, hey, I'll be there in 30 minutes, and we have 4 or 5 players lying around, then yeah, I would bust this out and play a nice little filler game real quick. I have other filler games that I prefer over Sheriff of Nottingham, but it is a fun game. I did enjoy it, which is why I gave it a 7 out of 10. And I hope you guys enjoy the review, and I hope you give it a good chance. Give it a shot, maybe at a convention or at a board game shop before you buy it, just because it may not be the type of game that your group likes or is into. Either way, thanks for watching, and we'll move on to the next segment. Hello, welcome. So, does this game belong on your shelf, or is there room on your shelf for this game? It really depends. If you like filler games where you're kind of bluffing and don't have any others, then yes, this would belong on your shelf. It's a fun, simple game that anyone can really pick up and play, and you can teach how to play it very, very quickly. It's similar to Liar's Dice in the sense of like you're bluffing, and Liar's Dice is obviously a very cheap game. All you have to do is buy a bunch of dice, which if you're a gamer, you probably already have a bunch of dice lying around. The difference between this and Liar's Dice, of course, is that you have less information about what each player might have, and you don't necessarily have to lie. while Liar's Dice is kind of required after a while, because as the numbers go up, eventually you have to bluff, and makes it challenging because, like, if you have 6 sixes and the other player has like 2 sixes and they're like, I have 4 sixes, you might want to be like, okay, I have 10. Like, nope, sorry, you don't. So yeah, there's definitely a lot more information that can call out bluffs on Liar's Dice or games like that. I would say, though, if you own games like Murder City or Pony Express, then no, this does not belong on your shelf. I would definitely say that those two are better games with a similar mechanic, similar thematic mechanic. Like, for example, with Pony Dice, you're lying, right? It's like Liar's Dice. You roll dice, you put it down, and you're bluffing. I have a full house. And if the players believe you, you move a certain amount of spaces based on whatever full house is valued. If they don't believe you, you lift up the cup and they see what you have, and then they get penalized if you do have full house, or you get penalized if you don't. So that game actually overall I think is a lot more fun. There's the dexterity involved in it, and has a similar mechanic of lying and bluffing each turn. Murder City, however, I think is almost like this game was inspired by that. I don't know if that's the case, but the mechanics for having a sheriff and auditing is pretty much the same thing in that game. I like Murder City a lot. I know there's a lot of people on Board Geek who didn't like it. It may not be a game that you might enjoy. Thematically, I thought it was really cool. It was like, I'm an investigator trying to track down murderers and pin evidence on them, whether or not they're guilty. And then there's a storytelling aspect to it where you explain to the auditor, who in this case was like the sheriff, you say, hey, this is the murderer, this is the weapon they used, and you have to be honest as well. Like, I have a knife face down, so I have to use knife into my story. I have this motive face down, I have to use the motive into my story. Then the auditor decides, hey, is this guy lying, or is he fabricating evidence, or is he being honest? And just like in this game, if you're fabricating evidence, you lose that evidence card, and it makes your case that much more weaker. If you are honest and the auditor says, hey, you're lying, they get penalized. Instead, I believe they have to give you money or something. I can't remember exactly off the top of my head. And then it goes to the trial, and then you roll dice, and you see if it succeeds. So it's not a carbon copy of that game, but it's very, very similar. And I feel like the mechanics in this game were, if not inspired by it, are very similar. Like, in the sense of, like, someone saw that game and went, hey, I could make a much simpler, fun game based on that idea. Either way, this game is pretty fun. But like I said, if you have Murder City or you have Pony Express, honestly, I'd rather play those games, and they are good enough as a filler game that you wouldn't need this game. So no, you wouldn't want to buy this game if you had those games. If you don't have those games, and you like lying, deducing games, you want something that's quick, simple, and fun, then go ahead and purchase this game. Otherwise, there are better games out there. But once again, Sheriff of Nottingham, a lot of fun. Hope you enjoyed the review. Hope you enjoy the game. Thanks a lot.